recording. Greetings, welcome to the Transforming Assessment webinars for the 7th of August. Time flies. Today's topic is on assessing teamwork and practical advice. So Nirmani and Peter from University of New South Wales will be our speakers for today. So I believe Nirmani, you're going to begin.
Yep, I am. Sorry. I was just trying to turn on the camera so people could see me just for a second before I turn it off.
No worries.
So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. For us, it's this evening, but for some of you, I think it's the morning. So I'm Nirmani Wijenayake. I'm from the science faculty, specifically from the School of Biotechnology and Biomolecular Sciences. And my colleague is Dr. Peter Neal. He's from the Faculty of Engineering, specifically from the School of Chemical Engineering. And we are both from the University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia. And today we are going to be talking a little bit about teamwork and giving you some practical advice based on our experience running teamwork for a few years now. Before we get into that, we are going to start off with a little activity. So it would be great if you put into the chat which cities are shown in these images. You could agree with others. So maybe you could put 1, 2, 3, 4, and then put in what you think these cities are. So I'm going to give you about 1 to 2 minutes to do that in the chat. And if you agree with other people's answers, feel free to do so in the chat as well. Some are very quick. Okay, number 3 seems to be the one that's being. Okay, so we have some really good answers coming in. I think Roisin got it completely correct. So number 1 is Barcelona, number 2 is Shanghai, number 3 is Chicago, and number 4 is Copenhagen. So well done if you got those right. A lot of people do get number 4 as Amsterdam as well. So that was just a quick activity to try to break the ice, and we'll come back to those icebreaker activities a little bit later in our talk as well. So just a bit of an outline of what we're going to do today. We're going to spend about maybe 15 to 20 minutes going over an example of how I specifically conduct group work in one of my own courses. So think of it as a bit of a case study. And then we look into evaluation of teamwork, and then looking into how to develop a community of practice around teamwork and how that can be really beneficial for people, and looking at students' perspectives and what they think about group work, and finally sharing some resources that are specifically for instructors as well as for students. So to start off with, both Peter and I use kind of this cradle to grave of teamwork concept, where we want the students to go through this teamwork process and really want to return to want to do group work. We don't want it to be like the death of group work because they had a horrible experience. We want them to have a good experience and want to come back wanting to do more group work throughout their university degree. So this process starts off with choosing the tasks to do the teamwork. So that's really important because sometimes people decide to do teamwork not because it's the best type of assessment, but rather because they don't want to do a lot of marking, and the best way to reduce marking is to do a teamwork project. And that's not a really good idea. When you choose a project for a teamwork, it has to have a purpose and it has to teach students something. The next part of this process is forming the team. So I will talk a little bit about different ways of forming teams. And then you have the operating in teams. So, how do we instruct the students in teamwork? How do we do a check-in process to make sure that everything's happening? How do we support the students through that process of them working together? And finally, we have the evaluation of teamwork. This is both the process of actually doing the teamwork, which sometimes a lot of people miss, and then the product or the output that they produce. And a lot of the times we now try to focus a bit more on the process rather than the product or output to make sure that the students are learning the skills that they need to through working as a team, which tends to be a graduate outcome for most of our universities. So I'm gonna, with the case study, I'm gonna talk from the context of my specific background, which is biochemistry. And I have a group project in one of my second year biochemistry courses with about 200 students. So a lot of the examples that I'm talking about are done on a class size of about 200 students with second year undergraduate students. So when it comes to forming teams, a lot of the times people have questions about what is the best way to form a team. So unfortunately, there is no one correct way of forming teams. If you look at the literature, lots of people propose different ideas, but no one has ever come up with this is the best way of doing things. So I have some examples of how you could potentially form teams, but it really depends on the context of your own course and how many students you have, what you're teaching, whether they're undergraduate, postgraduate, that sort of thing. So if you have a really large course, people tend to randomly assign the students into groups just because, if you have 1,000 students, it's a bit hard to go and try to sort them in a specific way. So randomly assigned is not the best way, but it's one of the common ones that's used in with large courses. There's also self-selection. So at our university, we use Moodle as our learning management system, and it contains a self-selection tool where students can go and put themselves into groups depending on who they want to be in a group with. And that can be quite helpful in large year courses where the students sort of know each other and their skills quite well. Some courses also do surveys where you ask the students specific questions and get them to fill out surveys at the beginning of the semester. And then you use those survey responses to put students into groups so that you have students of different skill levels coming together to form that group. You can also put students into groups based on grades. And this is the system that I use in my particular course. And I do it in a way where I actually put the high achievers together and low achievers together and the middle average students together, which is not, I think, a system that a lot of people use, but this actually tends to work really well, where in the low achieving group of students, they actually get the opportunity to be leaders and take leadership where they might not get that chance in a mixed group. So I'm happy to talk a bit more about that later if you have questions about that. You may also have hybrid teams where half of your group is joining online and the other half of them are joining through, in conducting maybe work in a classroom, and those needs to be set up in a way where you have a good mix of both groups. And you may also put students based on a specific skill. One thing that the literature does agree on is that the more diverse your group is, the better it is. So that's one thing that everyone agrees on, but how you then put them into the groups to get that diversity could depend on your specific context. So once you have formed the team, whichever method that you have used, it's really important to have icebreakers. I think a lot of the times, you obviously teach into a specific discipline. And if you start off by getting them kind of like into the discipline straight away, they might feel a bit shy. They might not want to contribute and start talking to each other because they don't feel like they're experts in that area, and they don't necessarily feel like they can contribute. So if you can break the ice by getting them to do something fun, then that would help them build a relationship. So that activity we just did at the very beginning with the cities, that's one of the activities I do with my students, because everyone have traveled to a certain extent, or they are in social media platforms where they see these kind of images, and it's a conversation that could easily start between members without having ever met each other. So you want to have fun activities where the students can kind of get to know each other. These are just a few examples of things that you could do. So this or that, where you present two different options to students. In this specific case, it's to do with their discipline, and they pick what they want to discuss to ultimately pick the most interesting topic that they want to discuss in a classroom. You could get the students to, come up with 10 things in common, or bingo like these ones here. Ideally, you want to try to incorporate more than one icebreaker activity. Often my students ask for more and more because they find them to be fun, and it's a really nice way of building that connection, not just for group work, but just building friendships while you're at university. So another thing that I do with my students is to have a tutorial or a lecture with them where we talk about group work and how to succeed in group work. One of the things we assume with our students is that they know how to do group work, and that's something that I learned over the years, we make that assumption that, you know, they've done that in high school, or they've done that in other year levels, so they should already know how to do group work. But often the students are not taught how to work effectively in a group. So we need to support them through that process. So one of the things I talk to them during that tutorial is the different team roles that they might play. Most students don't even try to reflect on what kind of skills that they have. A lot of the times they don't even realize that they have something to contribute to that group. So by going through some of the different team roles that they may play, it starts that discussion, get them thinking about that. And I also discuss with them whether they want to try to do one role for the whole term or whether they want to change their roles. This may depend on how long your semester or term is, but it is, I kind of type, someone said that they can't hear me. Can others hear me?
Yes.
I can hear,
Okay.
no problems,
Yes.
Nirmani.
Thank you. All right, thank you. So whoever that was might need to go and come back. So one of the other things that I discuss with them is to make sure that, you know, they discuss whether they want to do the same role throughout the term or change those roles, and, you know, kind of remind them that university team setting is a really safe environment for them to do this, because, you know, there's nothing really at risk, and creating that safe environment for them as well. So the next thing that I do with my students is to run a conflict resolution workshop. So these are some of the conflicts that could occur during the term, some of the really common ones. And so maybe like put your hand, not necessarily put your hand up, indicate in the chat somehow, you know, have you ever come across these kind of situations with your students? So did your students ever come to you saying that, you know, someone didn't contribute equally, or there's some sort of a communication breakdown and a misunderstanding about deadlines, conflicting schedules preventing them from meeting on time, or members, you know, dominant members taking over, different cultural backgrounds leading to misunderstanding. So unequal contribution is one of the really most common ones. So as we can see from the chat, you know, most people have encountered this either in your own experience working in groups, but also your students coming to you. So what I want is for the students to think about these conflicts before they actually start the group project. So in my specific situation, my students can't really start their group project until about week 5 of the term, but I already put them into groups in week 1 of the term, and in week 2, we talk about the conflicts that can occur during the term, something that might happen. And I want them to preemptively think about these conflicts and decide how they're going to solve it. So what I do with my groups is I give them a bunch of scenarios of problems that can happen during the term, really common ones like the ones you saw before. ChatGPT is actually really excellent at writing scenarios for you if you want. I got ChatGPT to write these two for me, and they get those scenarios and they need to sit down and discuss how they would deal with it. So the first one is about a team member missing deadlines and not coming to meetings. So they have to discuss and come to a decision about how they are going to solve that problem if that happened to them later in the term. The second one is about dominant team members and how you deal with that. So the idea is that they will be able to discuss it and decide what to do and how to solve this problem themselves, and we discuss it together as a class. And that way, if this does happen later on in the term, they have already discussed how they're going to solve it. So they don't feel as bad approaching that person and having that discussion. They don't feel awkward or feel like, you know, being pushy, because they've already decided that this is what they were going to do. So so that's a really nice way of dealing with that kind of conflict. And ever since I introduced the conflict resolution workshop, I usually have about like 40 to 45 groups in my course, and I would get maybe 2 groups coming to me with a problem. Whereas before this, I used to get way more groups coming to me with the problem, whereas now they are now equipped to sort of deal with the problem on their own. So now I have a problem for you to sort of try to solve, because one of the things that you could do yourself is to think about some of the problems that could happen and think about, as an instructor, the level of support you can provide your students ahead of time, so some of these things can be mitigated and, you know, um, finding a way to kind of solve them before they could even happen. So here's a scenario. You're in a psychology course and students are assigned to work in groups to research and write a comprehensive paper on a psychological theory. The group consists of 5 members with varying research skills and academic strengths. Some members contributed well-researched sections while others provided superficial content or failed to meet their commitments. The paper lacked cohesive flow due to individual sections being written in isolation without consideration of the overall structure. One team member copied section from online sources without proper citation, risking academic integrity. So as an instructor, how do you think you could support your students so some of these things could be prevented? So maybe you can put into the chat of 1 or 2 things that you could do ahead of time if you've developed a group project around this psychology course and you're requiring them to write a paper like this. How would you what kind of support can you put into place? Great. So we have some things coming up. Stage submissions is one of the best things that you can do because it allows you to see different skill levels of the students. It allows the students to see each other's skill levels as well. So somehow scaffolding the group task throughout the term or the semester, that could be a really excellent way of preventing some of this from happening because they can see their work ethics, their work quality, that sort of thing. Creating a team charter, that's an excellent idea. I'm going to talk about that in a second as well, because it's an agreement that they have. Links to reference guides, again, another excellent idea. So maybe you could, run some workshops or have some resources around how to conduct research or how to write a paper or, how to do proper citations. All of that stuff could, they may already exist within your university. So you just need to link to them so that students have access to those resources. Expectations, negotiation of responsibility, using some sort of a collaborative tool, so maybe Google Docs or Wiki, remind expectations, great, and maybe also writing really clear instructions and rubrics for the students that indicates where you're giving the marks and where they need to focus on. So really, some really brilliant ideas in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing. So with the conflict resolution, there's, so things that you should think about when you're setting up the group project. So you're preemptively thinking what kind of support you can give, but you should also consider getting the students to think about the conflict and how they could deal with that as well. So once I run the conflict resolution workshop, I get the students to write a team contract or a team charter, like someone mentioned in the chat. So with my course, I generally give them this specific form that they get to fill out rather than it being like an open charter that they write together. So they have to decide what kind of grade they want to get. They have to decide what roles they might play in the group. Are they going to make decisions around different topics? How are they going to come to a consensus? How often are they going to meet? How are they going to meet? That sort of thing. How are they going to meet deadlines? So everything is sort of covered here. I get my students to submit this. I don't actually mark it. I get them to just submit it so that if something does happen later on in the term, they can I can refer back to their team contract and see what they have decided as a group. It's something that we can refer back to as well. So I'm happy to share these team contract resources with anyone who might be interested as well. There are a lot of them around, and you can form your own depending on your course. Another thing I talk to my students about are meeting agendas and minutes. It's something that a lot of the lower level students never really consider. One of the biggest problems that we get is students coming and saying that some members of their group is not contributing or talking during meetings and things like that. And this is often because it's not because the student doesn't want to contribute, but they don't like being put on the spot and they don't, feel comfortable speaking on a topic that they haven't had time to think about. And coming to a meeting without knowing what you're going to discuss can be scary for some people, especially for people who might have English as a second language. So what I encourage the students is to have an agenda prepared ahead of time so that they know what they're going to discuss during the meeting, so that the students can actually practice or do the research and be prepared to come and present, so that when you're asked a question during that meeting, you can actually contribute. So I show them what an agenda might look like, and I show them what meeting minutes might look like. And in some courses, I also just give them like a form that they can fill out. So this is the third thing on the screen is like an example that I give up. So at the end of the meeting, they have to come up with action items and then who's going to do them and when the deadlines are. So it's all kind of recorded. And even if someone misses the meeting, they can look at these meeting minutes and figure out what they need to do. So one of the most important things is during that operations process is to have some regular check-ins with your students. And again, how this check-in happens would really depend on your class size and how you're going to do it. So if you have a much smaller class of about like maybe 20 to 30 students, you could have one-on-one meetings with them, or you could have assigned mentors that work with them on a regular basis. That's the ideal world. But this may not happen because of various reasons. But there are other ways you can do this. One of the ways I do it is through a reflection where my students have to submit a reflection around teamwork on a weekly basis. And one of the things I have as part of the reflection is whether they have any concerns or comments about the group project or anything that goes around in the course. And I read that on a weekly basis, and I'll be able to see if the students are struggling with something or if they have specific questions around something. And that way I can step in and try to support them, because obviously there could be something that you haven't thought about that is occurring within those groups that you could fix through these kind of check-in processes. With really large courses, you could have an in-class polling where you check in on them to see how they're going. Like you could do something simple like, have you started this part of the project yet, and see what percentage of the class has done it. And if majority of them haven't even started, you could start like encouraging them to get started a bit earlier. You could just chat to them during class. So I have labs because I'm in the science discipline. So I just go around talking to the students. You can also do evaluations with which Peter will talk about in a second. So this is sort of like my model of doing teamwork that I've just presented. So I put my students into teams from the very beginning of the term, even though they can't actually start the group project until later in the term, because I want them to build that relationship through icebreaker activities and discussions and things like that, so that by the time they come to the project, they already have some sort of a relationship that's been built. A lecture around how to succeed in teamwork, talking about group roles, things like conflicts, that sort of thing can be really helpful. Have icebreaker activities if you can, and make them fun if you can. Conflict resolution workshop, highly recommend. It has worked so well in my courses. Team contracts, regular check-ins, reflections, and finally the team member evaluations that Peter is going to talk in more detail now. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Nirmani. I'm going to jump out of the chat now. Great to be with you all. Thank you for this opportunity to share our experience and our practice with you. And as Nirmani said, I'm going to talk about evaluation of teamwork here. And I'm going to sort of touch on one model of teamwork, and maybe at the end of this section, I'll just share about some other models that we've seen. The way, and I'd be interested to hear from the chat, sort of models that you've used for the evaluation of teamwork. In this particular moment, I'm going to be talking particularly about peer assessment of teamwork. And as we get to the end of my section and we're thinking about student voice in this, it's actually come out that this is the ability for peer evaluation in teamwork is actually something that students value quite a bit. So a common model that's employed at UNSW, particularly in large classes, is the use of some sort of peer feedback survey. This is an example that you can see here, which is using various criteria that describe elements of effective teamwork, and this has been implemented using the this has been implemented in the UNSW workshop tool in Moodle. It's a slight variation of the regular workshop tool in Moodle. And so students would fill in, they're assigned to review their team members against these different criteria. And this is a sort of a set of criteria which we developed through some collaboration within particularly between science and engineering. You'll see similar sorts of things like this. That might be that there's sort of CatMe and some of the other tools around as well. One of the interesting things, though, that came out in my practice of this was actually working with first-year engineers in a design course. And I had a very brave student who came to me and disclosed that she had ADHD. She was an autistic person, and she came to me and she said, "I really feel that this criteria is actually discriminating against me. Some of the things about eye contact or not interrupting people was something that for her she felt was actually sort of impinging on who she was as a person." And that was a really striking thing, because I hadn't really grappled with this before. We'd just kind of been thinking about these things of what are the elements of effective teamwork and being a team member. And it was a really fruitful sort of conversation to work with this student and actually talk with them about their experiences of teamwork, to learn from them and actually work with some language around teamwork. And where we actually landed with was revising it to having more descriptive language of essentially the fundamental ideas of what we were looking for. So rather than describing elements of, say, what communication might look like, we described the sort of manner of communication. So, for example, is a person respectful, polite, and constructive in the way they communicate with the team, rather than saying, do they refrain from interrupting people, or do they always make eye contact with people they're speaking with? And we've found that this has actually worked out to be a much more inclusive approach. And it's a really critical thing to think about when you're actually evaluating teamwork, and asking students as well to evaluate teamwork, because there may be implicit biases in the system that you're using that might be impinging on, say, people who are neurodiverse. Also, another area that Nirmani touched on is people who are less confident in communicating in English. And it's worth both preparing your students to think about this, and also any teaching staff that are involved in mentoring teams or assessing teams, that for some students, they have completed some, say, academic English exercises. They may have been studying English in an academic context for many years, but then they come and might land in your class and find themselves having to sit in a team meeting where the conversation can move very fast and jump topics frequently. And that can be an experience which will shut a student's confidence down. They won't feel they're just working hard to keep up with the conversation, let alone actually make a meaningful contribution. And I think you can scaffold, again, using that language, you can scaffold the teamwork and the way teams work together by actually setting out, okay, so you might actually need to allow more time for people to be involved and to be contributing to the team. And as Nirmani said, having things like agendas and other things which will allow people to think ahead on what the conversations are can really improve the way that different team members who may feel less able allow them to contribute to the team. The other thing in terms of practice of evaluating teamwork is that we like to have multiple instances through the term. One reason is just to give students practice with using whatever system that you're using. Another is to actually allow students to improve. So there may be comments that they may get feedback that they're a bit domineering, they're a bit quiet. And so if you give students multiple opportunities during the term to receive feedback like this, there's opportunity to then implement that, to seek help perhaps as they continue in the course. Another thing, the other thing I would say in terms of evaluation of teamwork is it's good to have multiple data points. So not only just say using your evaluation instruments multiple times, but having other data that you can correlate this with. So an example, again, from my first year engineering course, is the students are all writing a journal, a design journal as part of their engineering practice, to be documenting ideas as they're being created, and also to be taking notes in meetings, and to be reflecting on what's happening, what they're learning. And we ask them explicitly as part of this journal to provide some comments on how they're interacting with the team, how they're finding that experience. And so when we get the data back from these surveys, it actually allows us to go, okay, so if we identify some students that have been rated poorly by their peers, then we can actually go and look at, say, the journals, see what's in the journals regarding both their teammates' perspectives and also the student in question's perspective. And we can do some correlation work to see whether the ratings that we've seen actually fit with practice. And that's an opportunity for more conversation, say with a demonstrator or a tutor, and with the students themselves in a discrete way. So that's sort of the way that we sort of approach this practice of teamwork. Some of the sort of more implementation details that we use, a very common approach within the Faculty of Engineering at UNSW is using the team evaluation plugin in the assignment and workshop tools in Moodle. You can define your own instrument here that you might want to use. You may have a favored survey tool that you want to use in terms of questions, and you can set some criteria. So for example, I like to ask these students these descriptive questions and then ask them to rate their peers as to whether they see them as about the same as the rest of the team or more or less than the rest of the team. The team evaluation system does some normalization and balancing of feedback as well. So if you have a team member that goes through and gives says everyone is performing much better than the rest of the team, it will account for that and moderate or normalize their ratings back to the average. Another approach that we've used in terms of peer evaluation is actually building a system out from Power Automate in the Microsoft 365 suite. So again, using a survey that asks students to rate their peers against criteria, using multiple choice questions and short answer questions into a Microsoft form. The data is then collected into a spreadsheet and processed into some scores for different criteria and aggregated across their peers. And then it creates a report which contains both the scores for particular criteria as well as written feedback from peers. And we do, with all these systems that I'm showing you tonight or this morning, we do go through and you have the opportunity to vet comments in case there's anything that you wouldn't want going to students, and you can obviously follow that up with the students that made it. This system concludes by then emailing an email with the report directly to the students. Okay. So one of the things is this, so we've been sharing with you sort of our practice and experience, and one of the things that happened probably about 4 or 5 years ago was that there were a number of us who understood that we're interested in teamwork. There'd been some move from students in one faculty to get teamwork eliminated in assessment tasks. And so there was this sort of concern and this question within the university around teamwork. And that drew a number of us to come together into a community of practice. And we're grateful at UNSW to be part of the education focus program. Both Nirmani and myself are OG, so original members from 2017 of the EF program. And the EF role at UNSW now encompasses almost more than 15% of the academic staff. With, as you can see, so in July it was 533, and just recently we were taught that we're over 540 now. And it's been a very successful program. We've had 162 promotions from A to B through to people being promoted to full professor, and some people have been promoted multiple times as part of the program over the last 7 years. We've received 3 national or international awards recognising the program, and one of the really important roles that the EF program has is faculty-based EF champions. So these are people who lead a community within each of our faculties. They act as a liaison between our Pro-Vice Chancellor's Office for Education and also the faculty leadership, and are able to represent the concerns of EF staff within the faculty, and there's been some very fruitful conversations around those things, and part of that has contributed to recent changes in our EBA at UNSW. The other thing as well as there's been a feature of the EF program since its inception is communities of practice, and these are communities of practice which are drawn together through interest of EF staff, and so we have 14 of those, covering everything from thinking about teaching for equity through to digital assessment, and some others on, say, work integrated learning, lots of different topics. But the one we're talking about today is the teamwork community of practice. Because, and where we're coming from is this question, as I was mentioning, you know, teamwork is this thing when you go out to employers, it's a key employability factor. That article that was shared recently, that's a great one, showing, yes, you know, these experiential learning that you get through teamwork is actually important when you go out to the workplace. Teamwork's also really expected by a lot of accrediting bodies, and we've seen that being connected with people and having this sense of connectedness and relatedness is really important for students' wellbeing and agency at university. And we see it as critical with our first years, as giving them connection with others, particularly for students that are coming from first in family and other backgrounds where they may not know anyone at university. But as you would know, and as everyone shared in the chat earlier, it can be fraught as well. You know, some students will express a preference to work alone. People mentioned distribution and quality of teamwork. You know, is assessment fair? If I feel I'm doing all the work, is the assessment fair? It can also create stress and anxiety. And there's also some other things to do with teamwork and organising teamwork where accreditors may expect that everyone has to learn the same thing, when that's very hard to organise when you're using teamwork effectively. So we developed this community of practice to discuss and contribute to the literature on teamwork. So we want to understand what others are doing and also do our own evaluation and even research on teamwork. We want to produce resources that aid the explicit development of students' teamwork skills. So not just sort of leaving it to chance, the chance of discovery, but actually setting out, as Nirmani showed, okay, so here are some strategies that we're going to use for dealing with conflict. Here are some ways to organize yourselves as teams. And then the other thing is we want to communicate and disseminate good practice around teamwork. And part of that opportunity is today. So thank you for joining us. The other thing is, so our teamwork COP, it's actually been a wide range of interest. We've got about 45 members these days, and a good mix of both academic and professional staff, so educational developers and other staff members across the university. We're well represented from most faculties except law and justice. They seem to not be so interested in teamwork, but we'll work on that. But yeah, so I mentioned about one of the key things that we're doing as a COP is actually trying to develop and share resources. And so one of the things we've been doing over the last year is collating resources that have been developed by the members of the COP and by speakers that we have to our regular meetings, and collating those in a structured way around team formation, the team process, evaluation and technology in a collected way. And you can access that using the QR code or the link on the screen. I'll put those up at the end as well. But they have all sorts of different categories. So for example, different strategies for team formation. We have other sorts of examples here of, say, some ideas for hybrid teams. So if you have students who are working remotely and students that are working on campus, what are some ways that you can actually design that activity well as a teacher? Other things like team evaluation here, so various examples of rubrics and instruments that you might want to use in team evaluation. Another thing, we had an opportunity to run a lunch and learn task for the whole university, and so what we did as part of that was we set out and produced a checklist. So for staff that, and for you, if you're not using Teamwork and you're interested in trying it out, then we've got a Teamwork checklist which sort of steps you through the various design phases that you should be working through, and questions that you should answer as you work through the Teamwork design process and supporting your students. It's also good if you already have Teamwork tasks to sort of cross-check and make sure that you're actually thinking about all the different things that might come up in Teamwork. I mentioned about sharing, valuing student perspectives, and we've actually had students come and speak to us in our community of practice. One of them, in fact, was doing his PhD on the use of teamwork in industry as part of an engineering education project. And so we really welcome those perspectives, because it helps us sort of look under the hood and see how our students are actually thinking about this. And so one of the projects associated with our community of practice was conducted by 2 honours students in engineering, and they surveyed around 84 students, mainly from engineering. And they found, you know, as you expect, that most students reported some negative experience of teamwork, and this classic meme about teamwork, with 63% of students reporting that they had experienced unfair workload distribution. At the same time, we were pleased to find that there was also some positive perceptions of teamwork. Within engineering, it's a core part of our professional identity about teamwork, and we were concerned that students would be turned off that learning outcome, that program learning outcome, by their teamwork experiences. But we did find that 93% of students that had reported a positive experience, and even students arguing that we should use it more in class, which was interesting and encouraging. And 73% recognising the benefits of the peer learning that goes on in teams and working in groups compared to just working by themselves. But the standout result was 98% of students that we surveyed saying that they want teamwork skills and the approaches to teamwork to be taught explicitly in class. So and so that's really been a really important result for us as a community of practice, to understand that our students want us to help them and to scaffold teamwork for them. And as you can see here, so in terms of things that students might like, they having short in-class meetings for your teams is a really great idea. Students do love being able to pick their own project team, even though you might have good pedagogical reasons for not allowing that. And again, as well, so using peer evaluation was something that the students value. In some of the qualitative data, we saw that students value it as a kind of emergency lever a safety valve in case things aren't working, to be able to sort of point out and provide feedback, but also to alert staff that things aren't working well. So as we think about this, we've produced these resources. We're also able to attract some funding from the university, from the Faculty of Engineering, for a joint project across the faculties to actually develop some scaffolding tools. And the idea behind these tools was not so much that they're things for staff to use, but these are pamphlets and videos that we can provide to teams as a way for them to work together and learn together about teamwork. So we have pamphlets on, say, conflict management, and that set out different ways of working together and pointing out to sort of how we might work to compromise with each other, and also some videos on different key topics in teamwork. So communication, conflict management, thinking about feedback. So one of the things we want to talk with students about, because we're doing these evaluations, is what is a good way to give feedback? You know, you want it to be specific and actionable and personal, but also how do I receive feedback, both in terms of a feedback literacy, but also in terms of personally, not sort of instantly becoming defensive if you receive criticism, but learning how to take it on board and discuss it with others. Other things about leadership and accountability and trust, all really important areas for working as a team together. So I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity for both myself and Nirmani to come and speak with you today. We'd like to also acknowledge the ongoing support of the UNSW Education Focus Program for supporting the work of the Teamwork Community of Practice. If you'd like to have a look at our resources, I see Matt's posted the link in the chat, or there's the QR code here. And if you're interested in joining the COP, we do welcome external members. We have a growing number of external members, and if you follow that QR code, that will take you to an EOI form, and that will let you register for the community of practice, as well as other communities of practice at UNSW. So thanks very much. Happy to take questions.
Greetings, folks. If you want to ask questions, you can do so in the text chat, or if you'd like to put up your hand and ask a question via a microphone, there's a hands up symbol in the bottom center of the screen. You're welcome to ask a question via the microphone by doing so.
There was a question from Lottie in the chat about how do we assess the quality of the collaboration directly using the evaluation form that we've showed before. So Lottie, to a certain extent, yes, because the Moodle workshop tool that I use to do that evaluation, it actually gives us a score for each of the students based on each of the criteria has like a mark associated with it, you know, the communication, accountability, and trust, and things like that. And so as an instructor, you can go and see the score, how the students were scored across the different criteria, and then that helps you to see some of them who might not be performing at a certain level for some of those skills. And that's where you can step in and, you know, talk to those students to find out what's going on, provide them those resources that Peter showed at the end, that sort of thing. And that's why it's really a good idea to do that evaluation more than once during the term. So I do it in week 5 and week 10 at in my course, so that in week 5 you can identify students who might not be meet that level of skills that's needed to conduct group work or teamwork. Hopefully that sort of makes sense.
Now there's a couple of extra questions in the text chat for Nirmani and Peter, if you are able to read them.
So there's a question on, can you share your thoughts on assessing social competencies such as leadership through teamwork? Peter, do you want to take this on first?
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, there's I think teamwork is actually a great opportunity for students to practice leadership. And it's something we'll talk about with students, that leadership can occur in different contexts and in different manners. Often, Nirmani was talking about the roles that students can take, and actually rotating through those roles or finding different ways of taking those on can be really important. So taking leadership, showing leadership can be, chairing meetings, being sort of project manager, project driver, those sorts of things. But also it can be just taking initiative and taking responsibility for things. So we can see that whether one of the criteria that I use is on leadership, but you could use, there could be ways in which you do it, say mentor observation of team meetings, observation of how teams are working together in, say, a workshop or in other activities like that. So some observational assessment could be a way of doing that as well.
There's another. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just saw Neal's answer there. Neal's question about the balance in your courses between teaching about teamwork and the main course content. So, Nirmani, do you want to go for that one first?
I mean, I think I almost got onto this whole area because when I first started putting group projects into my courses, I just, like I said, I assumed students know how to do it, and it was a complete disaster. So I rearranged my whole course to involve that group work, teaching the students the group work process. So it did require me to make space for that. So to run that conflict resolution workshop, to run the icebreaker activities and things like that, I had to make space to teach them the teamwork. And I thought it was valuable because 30% of my coursework is a team project that they had to do. I really wanted to spend the time teaching them how to do that effectively, so they got the most out of that. Luckily for me, I have 3-hour labs, so it was a matter of kind of like changing my lab slightly, so there was space during the labs to do some of that work. So I would say, but I only really had to do that for the first couple of weeks, because after that, once you've kind of built that foundation, they're sort of on their own, and then you just have the regular check-ins to kind of keep an eye on things. But it does require you to rework your courses a little bit to include the time to do that.
Yeah, and I think just not necessarily on that question, but just something to point out, part of UNSW's assessment policy is that no more than 30% of a student's grade can be from unmoderated teamwork. And so that's where interest in using some sort of peer assessment or other mechanism to moderate team assessments or team tasks has come from. And so, yeah, that's one of the things there. Lee's got a question about the definition and differentiation of academic and professional roles. It's a good question. I know one of the key, like all Australian universities, we've been wrestling with position descriptions recently. And I think one of the questions that we often need to answer in distinguishing between a professional and an academic role is about subject matter expertise and whether the role calls for subject matter expertise. Sort of a differentiation, say, between an academic and an educational developer would be in relation to, is it about a general knowledge of good educational practice and educational technologies versus a knowledge of a particular subject matter. Nirmani, have you had, you're a deputy head education, so you're...
That's a really new role.
This is your job. I should have gone to you first.
No, but I think your definition is quite correct in the sense a lot of the educational developers, like when you said professional, I immediately thought of the educational developers because I think they are the closest to an academic at the university. And yeah, I would say it is to do with that expertise, and also, at least from my discipline, it's having some sort of a research background in our disciplines to be able to teach the students what's required. But yeah,
That's right.
I mean, yeah, I've never really thought about it.
And it becomes grey when you come to lab staff, because often those lab staff have
Yeah.
may even have doctoral qualifications in the subjects
Yeah,
that
some
they're
of ours
in
do.
the
Yeah.
labs. Yeah.
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 Okay, folks, is there any more questions? We're almost 2 minutes towards the end. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank Nirmani and Peter for coming along today. It's great to hear your experiences and to be able to tap into the community of practice at UNSW. There was a bit of a side chat in there about open resources, and yeah, we thank you for continuing the tradition at UNSW of keeping the resources open as public as possible and resisting the horrible temptation of putting things on the Microsoft platform that closes everything off. So yeah, I think things like SharePoint are evil personally, because they prevent sharing, the very thing that we want to happen. Don't put a password in front of your teaching and learning resources. So thank you very much again. Any last minute questions, folks? Otherwise, I'm going to give a quick promo for the next session coming up. It's a joint session with the Assessment and Higher Education Network in the UK. And it will be back to the old generative AI in assessment kind of theme that's been happening recently. This one will feature 2 speakers talking about authentic assessment, and also about feedback. So thanks very much. Hopefully we will be able to see you all next month. I shall stop the recording.